everyone. Today is Saturday, June 15th. You are here with the International African American Museum Center for Family History webinar series. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I have two guests here today, Brian Sheffey and Donya Williams. So today is going to be a little bit different. No trivia today. This is more educational and conversational. So we're going to have conversation with Donya, and we're also going to have a small presentation, but we're going to talk about the Caribbean and South Carolina, a little bit about the transatlantic slave trade. The guests that were titled to be here with us today, unfortunately, there's circumstances that kept them from being here. So we got this, as they say. So Brian, if you would share the slides, I'm going to go ahead and start right on the presentation, and then we'll have discussions with Donya Williams. And thank you, Donya, for being here with us.
Oh, no problem. You know, I'm always here for you.
Yes. So the title today is Tracing Ties, a discussion on British and Spanish West Indian family history research. What a topic, you guys. Just what a topic. Next. So introduction to talk about for the discussion today is a little bit about the Caribbean, specifically British and Spanish West Indies, as mentioned before. This is really about the movement of enslaved Africans, colonization by the European powers. The cultural amalgamation of the Caribbean has left unique genealogical footprints. We want to share with you today that research in family history in these areas is not just about tracing your lineage. There's stories that could be uncovered about resilience, survival, and identity. So again, to all of you that are family historians and genealogists, hold on. We are going to share a lot of information, and then we're going to discuss it. Next. We got 4 objectives today. We want to give you the glimpse of the historical events and movements that shape family lineages in these areas. And that's going to include us getting a little basic understanding of the transatlantic slave trade, colonization, and again, the social economic factors that influence this area. We're going to discuss some strategies or share with you some methodologies for doing this type of research. We're going to highlight, with Donya's help, some personal and emotional journeys of tracing family history. And again, we're going to showcase how it's really rewarding aspects of when you discover or you're on track to find your family in certain areas. Center for Family History's role is to create this platform for attendees to ask questions, share their experiences, and also be able to network with other people that are in the same field or conducting the same genealogical research. We believe that this is a collaborative environment, and we're going to foster and support and foster a supportive community for folks that are conducting genealogical research and discovery. We got some takeaways for today. And again, I've bolded on some of these slides the things that I want to mention. And again, gain an understanding of the historical backdrop of the British and Spanish West Indies, including the impact of the transatlantic slave trade on family lineages. We'll learn again about specific challenges faced in the Caribbean genealogy research. We're going to discover the resources and tools that are available for tracing your family in the Caribbean. And again, understand the personal and emotional rewards of genealogical research. And all of us that are researching African Americans in the United States are going to walk this journey. Next. So briefly, the transatlantic slave trade, that is the movement of Africans from Africa to the Caribbean and then to the U.S. I want to highlight on the right-hand side, you can see the logo for the Sons and Daughters largest forced migration in human history involves the transportation and the movement of millions of Africans, across the Atlantic Ocean. And again, it's driven by European colonial powers. I'm going to say money, greed, and slavery. Africans were captured through warfare, rapes, and kidnapping by other Africans or European traders. You got major coastal trading centers, which today would be Ghana, Nigeria, and Angola. Of course, there's others. Name it. Within the Middle Passage. That's where Africans were captured and loaded on these European slave ships, where they were in unbelievable conditions during this Middle Passage, across the Atlantic Ocean. They were packed together, malnourished. There was a lot of violence and also disease that was happening. In the sons and
Shelley,
daughters, I'm sorry.
Shelley, there's an issue with your audio.
Okay,
Oh no, you're back. You're back.
okay. So, the sons and daughters of the United States Middle Passage is a hereditary society. And what is happening there? People are able to document their enslaved ancestors that are here in the United States but had come through the Middle Passage. So, I'm giving that as an informational place. They hold annual conferences. I personally am a member of that society and was able to document an ancestor who was enslaved in the United States. One of the significant things about what was happening on that Middle Passage, people were also chained together and again subject to diseases, malnourishment, and abuse. Mortality rates were high. It's stated that up to 20% of the enslaved Africans during that journey, were they died. When they got to the Caribbean upon arrival, they were sold at markets or through auctions at plantations, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. The Caribbean served as both a final destination for many enslaved Africans and a transshipment point for those who would be sold to other parts of Americas, and we're including the United States. Next. So we're coming here to the USA. We know that in the Caribbean, some of the enslaved folks were transported to the mainland American colonies. We're going to know them as South Carolina, Georgia, and Virginia. They were significant, not the only places. This is all around the demand for labor on plantations that had the cash crops, sugar, tobacco, cotton, and so forth. What was driving all of this? They needed cheap labor any way they could get it. And I'm saying these things because each of these points could lead you to information or documentation that you could seek out more information and connect with people that are also doing this research. And it's interesting that I highlighted on the slide the triangular economic system. We got Europe, we got Africa, and we got the Americas. We got goods that were shipped from Europe to Africa. Enslaved folks were coming from Africa to the America. And then you had raw materials that are from Americas back to Europe. Transatlantic slave trade's got lasting impacts, and it definitely left a demographic and a cultural landscape for the Caribbean and the United States. You got to understand the movement to be able to do some decent genealogical research. So again, hopefully what we share with you today will help you doing that. And by studying the transatlantic slave trade, researchers and descendants are going to be able to gain a little deeper appreciation of their heritage and also, number one, the resilience of their ancestors. We are here because somebody survived. Next. I want to give you a little picture of where we're talking about. The Caribbean is home to 13 island nations, and they're listed: Antigua, Barbuda, Bahamas, Barbados, and yes, I have it in red for a reason, Cuba, Dominica, Dominican Republic, and so forth, as y'all can see on this map. Next. The Spanish Caribbean is going to be Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Dominican Republic and Venezuela. So I'm showing a map of 1899, and there's the link there that if people want to pursue and also look at the map. And also, Puerto Rico becomes a territory of the United States. And I wanted to highlight because that's under the Spanish Caribbean area. And so they become sovereignty from Spain. And under the United States, it marks the beginning of Puerto Rico's status as an unincorporated territory of the United States. And one of our speakers, which we hope to have later, will talk exclusively about Puerto Rico. And this is at another webinar. And that was Dr. Ellen Fernandez-Sacco, because she was scheduled to be here today. Next. So, want to share a few little tidbits. This whole thing about the slave trade is about money. It can be the coins, the dollar bills, property. So, and I'm going to read from the slide. According to the Transatlantic Slave Trade Database, South Carolina was a major recipient of these enslaved people. Yes, we're going to see a lot of stats here. Between 1670 in 1808, Charleston, South Carolina, saw approximately 150 to 200,000 Africans pass through its port. A lot of these folks came right from the Caribbean islands, including Jamaica. You can find that information on slavevoyages.org. Enslaved Africans arrived in Jamaica were often seasoned before being sold. And I know Donya's going to come right back at me when I'm done. All right, explain to me what a seasoned African was, and I will get to that. So the movement of the Africans from Jamaica, as an example, to South Carolina, again, it was driven because there was the demand for labor on these plantations with the cash crops such as rice, indigo, and of course, later cotton. Next. So what happened once slaves got to South Carolina? They were auctioned. Now, I'm not saying everybody was auctioned, but there was auctions that happened. Those things took place in the public area, public markets. In downtown Charleston, you got the old slave mark on Kelmer's Street. There were advertisements. Everything that I'm saying right now is a source for genealogical research. Auctions, advertisement. The slave auctions were in the local newspaper. It might have had ages, names, physical attributes about the folks that were enslaved and that were up for sale. Also note that there were private sales. Some of those rich slaveholders negotiated deals with the slave traders. And then once they're purchased, those folks went to work on plantations. South Carolina, we had rice and indigo plantations. And also, again, all of them were very labor intensive and would not have successfully survived without slave labor. The enslaved people were assigned various roles. It could have been based on how they looked, their age, their gender, and so forth. But don't think they just labored. You had skilled laborers, not just people working in the field. There's carpenters, there's blacksmiths, the domestic servants. People came with skills and also learned skills once they got over here. The living conditions, as you all know, I'm not saying anything that's not new, were very poor. They were bad. They were unbelievable. People lived in basic cabins or quarters that really had minimum to no facilities whatsoever. So again, Look at what documents might be able to be gained. Next. So what do you do first as a research? You're just getting started. Well, first thing you want to do, look on the left. Get a pen and paper and start writing things down. Start taking notes. Start writing your questions down. You want to begin with what you know, right? What do you know? What do you know about your parents, your grandparents, and so forth? You're going to talk to the elders that are in the family. Find out what they know and actually what you don't know. And now's that time to start gathering that. We're all on a time limit here. Note that if there's any oral histories that's being shared or that you've heard of coming, through your lifetime and talking to your cousins, don't think about just going to the grandparent and things. Don't forget the uncles, the aunts, and the cousins. They might have got a different story, even coming from the same person. And then you want to attempt to fill out a 5-generational chart. And that would include you showing from a second great grandmother down to you, say the child. So there's an example of Family Tree Magazine has those downloadable. They're available all the time free. Next. So Diane Wormsley, who was going to be on schedule, was not able to be here today. She did a talk on Family Tree webinars. If you're not a member, it's okay. She gave permission for us to share her 5-step research method. And this, again, is for Caribbean research. She said, number 1, employ best genealogy best practices. You're basically going to drive your research from the present to the past. This is where that interview starts going, that talking, that dialogue, and things like that. You want to check out the genealogical proof standards. There's 5 components to that. And it's basically saying, you know what? You got to analyze, you got to research, you got to cite your references and things. So it's a good 5-step process, and that's available from Genealogical Standards on the board for certification. You can download and look at those 5 steps, or even Google. Number 2, got to find some resource material. What's available? Google's your friend. And we'll show you some other things that were really helpful to find information about conducting research in the Caribbean. My favorite is number 3, create a timeline of historical events. You want to start building from that generational chart into a timeline where things are in chronological order. As you find them, start adding them. You can make them very fancy in a spreadsheet or use a table. But again, it keeps things organized. You want to maximize the research that's online. You want to start with your big databases like Family Search or Ancestry, and we'll see a little bit more about that. And then if you have the opportunity, is to go visit, walk the grounds where your people came from, be able to visit that island or that colonial country. Next. So let's take a quick glimpse of Barbados. And why did I pick Barbados? You'll know why in a few moments. So, birthplace of the British Slave Society. Sugar was the popular thing. Fortunes were made from sugar, and enslaved people was the workforce. Barbadian planters acquired more enslaved Africans by the 1670s. When Carolina colony was first being settled, and Barbados was basically Black. The population of Black folks was the majority. So again, looking at Barbados during the 17th century and West Indies were also Carolina's chief source of enslaved laborers. And so I'm sharing with you a map so you can see some of the communities that are there. Next. So continuing on, 1/3 to 1/2 of Carolina's early enslaved laborers at this time came from English West Indies, particularly Barbados, some of them were not coming right from Africa. So you have the ships flowing, going to Barbados, and then coming over into the United States. Enslaved Africans were throughout the New World. Anywhere they needed labor, people were looking for them. And again, that money is flying. And sometimes you got the know that people were resisting. So it wasn't just a welcome opportunity to come to this new world. Enslaved Africans resisted, I'm going to say pretty much all of the time. They also sometimes had rebellions, stalling work, and runaways, which a lot of you know about. There were also some very famous white Barbadians that had small to medium sized landholders on the island that actually immigrated into Carolina. Some of these families became very prominent in Charleston area, including the Middleton, Drayton, and the Gibbs families. They've got Barbadian origins. Next. So in other words, you know who to look for to see who's around your people and who has access to your people. So here's just a map again of Barbados. And I've got an arrow pointing to Barbados. But you know what? Jamaica's up over there under the word Greater Antilles, if you can see. You can see the Dominican Republic and Haiti. This is the area we're talking about. So the point with the maps, you have to have a map in order to conduct genealogy. Know what the area you're working at, who is next to your folks. Next. So what do you know about Gadsden's Wharf? Here we come. That is Mr. Christopher Gadsden, the owner of Gadsden's Wharf. If you know about Gadsden's Wharf, put something in the chat or in the comment box. And if you know what we're talking about, share it so other people will also know. It was a final destination for 100,000 plus enslaved Africans during the peak of the international slave trade. And some researchers, and various sources, they estimate that at least 40% of all of the enslaved coming into what we know the United States came into Gadsden's Wharf. That's pretty critical. And there's a point why I'm saying this. Next. So I also want to talk, before I go back to Gadsden's Wharf, I want to go back to saying what resources are available. If we're looking at Barbados, I'm just using Barbados as the connection because there's a direct connection to Gadsden's Wharf in Charleston, and I'm going to say the International African American Museum. That museum is built over that wharf. That is a sacred spot. When you're talking about up to 40% of the folks coming into this country came into that spot. Think about it. So again, a lot of local folks in the Charleston, South Carolina, and other areas, not just South Carolina, Low Country, Virginia, and other places have roots, or they're seeing matches, DNA matches that are coming up from Barbados, Jamaica, and these other areas. How did that happen? We're telling you that. So the Family Search Wiki is a goldmine for researchers. Hopefully people are using it. It's not just within the United States. What you see on the screen is the Barbados genealogy from the Family Search Wiki. They're telling you where to find birth, marriage records, parish, slave registries, wills and probates, and so forth. So again, when you're starting the research, you want to hit that wiki for wherever you're researching, trying to get guidance to where you need to go. Next. So here is the look at the Barbados government. They've got birth, marriage, and death records. And you can see on the left in the time frame. Yes, slaveholders had records over there. So is it possible to track? We don't know. We're going to hear something from Donya a little bit later, but you could be able to find back to where they were at Barbados, right into Charleston or in another area. So this is giving you the time frame that records or civil registrations began in Barbados in 1890. You can get them through the registration office, and again, also look at the Family Search Wiki. Next. You got the Barbados church records from 1637 to 1887. Those church records predate civil registration. You're going to see baptism, marriages, burials. All of this, again, is through the barbados.org archive site. Next. Slave register. These are things that we, as researching African American ancestry, want to know. Where are they? Well, the Caribbean roots. They've got slave registers, and they have the registers of the slaves in Barbados from 1817 to 1834. You can access them through the Barbados Department of Archives, the National Archives in the UK. And again, there's the links. Take a screenshot if you'd like. But also remember, link through the Family Search Wiki to get a hold of these. But you're looking at one of the slave registers right there that they're giving names. They're also giving some descriptors. Next. Wills and probate records. Yes. Slaveholders definitely had wills. They had to divvy up their property. Barbados.org on their archives provides information about that. They're accessible, again, online databases. What information are you going to find in there? Same thing you find in the United States. You're going to see the testator, the beneficiaries, the property, and relationships. Gold mines of information. Next. Land and property records. Don't think of researching in the West Indies or in the Caribbean as being something totally different. They had deeds, they had plantation records, they had land surveys, just like we see here at the National Archives or NARA. And again, you're going to go through Barbados Department of Archives. I could say the same thing if I had Jamaica or Trinidad up here. The same thing. Go through and find them. Next. Newspapers and periodicals. Yes, right on the barbados.org archives. You're going to see the same type of announcements, local news, historical events. One of the things is to connect with a group that's over there, a genealogist or a historical type society, or go into those local libraries. You're going to have the same challenges that in the Caribbean research that you're also going to have when you're researching in the United States. There's going to be missing information, and there's going to be inaccurate information. And again, finding out what they have, and is it going to connect to who you have that you're looking for. So newspapers and periodicals are really good resource for you to find things. Next. So online resources, of course, again, as I've mentioned, Family Search, Barbados Department of Archives. So put any country there and say, what archives, what do they have? Online forums, there's social media groups for the folks like us, the genealogists, enthusiasts. There could be online courses and webinars or even blogs. Find out if there's a university that has any dissertations and things that are available to read about the transatlantic slave trade and other important things that you would want to access. You also have the South Carolina Department of Archives and History and online records. Next. So this is a little bit hard for you to see. We'll put this into a handout, but these are places for online resources. You got Barbados and the Roots in Carolina, and you got the College of Charleston. You got Cindy's List, and of course, Family Searches at the top there. You got the Anson's Landing to Ganson's Wharf, A Brief History. One of the big things we want to share with you is do the local community research. exhaust what's at the area that you're researching, be it the country or be it the state down to the local county. Next. So, key resources for connections to South Carolina and the slave trade. Again, South Carolina Department of Archives and History, Low Country Africana has tons of information on it. South Carolina Historical Society, you got National Archives over in the UK, and they've got records of the transatlantic slave trade. You got the Bristol, England, transatlantic slave trade information, and so forth. And again, you're looking for the movement, Africans moving through the transatlantic slave trade, where they come, where they go again when they come into the United States. Lots of resources here. Next. That should be it. So thank you for sharing those slides, Brian. So Donya, here we
Yeah.
go.
I'll jump in with a few quick things while I'm thinking of them while we're kind of in this general territory.
Sure.
So one thing I wanted to remind people: ports and wharfs are two different things. So
Yes.
port is comprised of many different wharves. So the ship comes into a wharf. The wharf is part of a port. Best way of thinking about it. Right. It's also important to research the cultures of enslavement in the places where you're researching. No two places had exactly the same kind of culture of enslavement. And what do I mean by that? Well, the culture of enslavement in a place like Edgefield, South Carolina, the planters lived in the same land as those that they enslaved, which is why so many of us descend from them. Planters in and around Charleston, like Georgetown County, Beaufort, Berkeley, all of those places. If they were wealthy enough, they lived in Charleston. That's where they did all of their legal work and filed all of their legal papers. They let the running of their plantations to an overseer or a bunch of enslaved drivers to do that research. So it pays to understand how slavery was being practiced where you're researching. And I mention that because of a place like Jamaica, for instance.
Yeah.
Were the wealthy planters living on their plantations or were they living in Kingston? Where would they be filing their legal paperwork? You need to research and read about that to get the answer to that question, because I don't know. I don't know what they did in Jamaica. Also, the culture of enslavement could be enslaving families who practice baptizing their enslaved people or christening them. That's another record set that you would need to look into.
Absolutely.
It is always worth remembering that slavery was a business. And if you're any kind of a credible business person, you have business records. You have to. That's how you run a business. You have business records. You need to figure out whether that enslaver's business records still survive, and if they do, where they are. There was another one that I wanted to. Oh, you were mentioning about slave advertisements when
Yes.
enslaved people were coming to the ports. Well, Donnie and I had a wonderful Canadian academic called Dr. Katrina Kiefer, who was talking about the importance of looking out for things like descriptions of body markings, scarring, intentional scarring, and
Mhm.
other kind of body adornment, because that would actually tell you where that enslaved person's cultural roots were. So that was it. I just wanted to. Oh,
Excellent
and
points. Thank you.
there's also a smaller triangle of trafficking of enslaved African and African descended people that I thought you would find really interesting. Came out when I was doing some research for private clients who were held by Spanish American families. So we're talking Alabama, Florida, and
Mhm.
Louisiana. There was a triangular trade between Cuba, Florida, Spanish Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, and Mexico.
Wow.
That was a much smaller triangle. So that may actually explain a few kind of funky DNA results that some
I
people
was
may
going to
have.
say Mexico coming in. That
Yeah,
one's really interesting. I didn't know about Mexico.
cool.
Good
I
point.
I turn it back to you two ladies.
All right. Danya, do you have any questions? I see that pretty smile. Come on.
Well, in most instances, like most people, they will always have to have, where should they start their genealogical research for ancestors from the Caribbean?
Well, first thing, again, you got to start with what you know. And I made a point of that on, during on the slides. You want to gather as much information that you can that comes from family members. That's going to include names, locations, and also dates. So that's one way to get going. And that's where I say get that pen and paper, because it's
Right.
time. You got phones. Everybody's got a cell phone. Got to start recording some of that stuff. You also want to look for your primary resources as well. Sources like birth, marriage, death records, and certificates. And again, oral histories from relatives. You want to use the online databases. We mentioned Ancestry, we mentioned Family Search, MyHeritage, and also the Caribbean records. Because if we're tracking where people are coming from, the the Caribbeans a lot of times would have been the stop off for more buying and selling before they come to the United States. And
Mm-hmm.
again, think about the local community. Visit your local archives, your public libraries, partner in with and join these local historical societies, not just in the United States, but also in the Caribbean. And again, find out who's doing this type of research and start following them for more information.
Well, I mean, I'm definitely in agreement with that because I've been researching my father's side
Mm-hmm.
and I'm half Jamaican. So
Oh, got it.
that takes me into that kind of research. And one of the things that I've definitely learned is they're not really into the DNA thing, they don't trust it.
Mm-hmm.
So, with that being said, how do you go about what are your thoughts on still trying to get that information without using DNA? Because you have the generation that is now that taking the DNA test, and this is why I know where my connection is because of those younger generation. But just like you have that generation, then you have those grandparents and those older aunts and uncles that are like, why are you doing this? You should have just left well enough alone. And they're more vocal than our own family members that say that our family members will just don't answer you. Shelley, I've been in a position where I was talking to one lady and you could tell she was speaking to her grandmother, and her grandmother told her, you get off that phone, you get off that phone right now. And she just hung up.
There
So,
there is a lot of discussion with that. So hold on for the DNA. You also have to understand that not everybody likes what we're doing. And I'm saying, as far as genealogical research, that
mm-hmm,
everybody includes your immediate family, cousins, and so forth, and other people.
mm-hmm,
But if you're looking to talk to your family before you venture into DNA, I always put a warning out.
yep,
Number one, DNA is fascinating. I love it. I even found out I'm not a Murphy. There's another person that was the great grandfather and not who we thought it was. But families have to be prepared that some information could come back that it's not what they know.
that's
Or it
right,
might not be what the mother or the grandparents or whoever know.
that's
A
right,
lot of times open up, y'all see the TV shows and things like that, and they're finding these discoveries and things. So I think first the family has to agree that no matter what, we are still family. DNA is important. It helps a lot with adoptees and folks that are researching their biological family. I'm trying to track my biological family on my Murphy side. So DNA came to a component. 20 years looking for William Michael Murphy. The reason I couldn't find him, because there wasn't one. The great
oh,
grandfather was somebody else. So again, dealing with the family, what is your goal? Did you set a goal about the research? Because if people are just gathering stuff and they're not doing anything with it, then I wouldn't recommend you tapping into DNA. I think you want to set goals for your research and explain this with the family. This is why I'm doing this. This is what it means. This is what I'm looking for. this is the goal, and this is how I'm going to share that information for my children, grandchildren, other generations to come. So again, I think a well planned out instead of just randomly taken, because there's so many different DNA tests, and 9 times out of 10, people don't even know what they're testing for. So again, you
Amen.
want to get educated on what the results could come back with you. So again, that's a sit down with the family. Highly recommend. You can also get a person to be like a moderator with your family to help them understand why you're doing this research. People get attracted, and then I'm going to say addicted to genealogical research. Some of us don't know how to stop. We're going to keep going. Go ahead, Brian.
I was going to say on the DNA front, it's very important for people, and especially if the person who's thinking about it is knowledgeable, but explaining it to to their family members
Mhm.
about the different kinds of DNA
The
test.
test.
We're still getting people coming into the center going, I did a DNA test and it says I'm 100% Yoruba. Well, we know what DNA test they took. We
Yes.
know
Mm-hmm.
that that was a mitochondrial or a Y DNA test and not an autosomal. So people
Mm-hmm.
need to be DNA testing is like any other kind of tool. You wouldn't use a flathead screwdriver if a Phillips head screwdriver is needed. You can, but you may destroy the screw or the screwdriver. You're not going to get the result that you anticipated. So you understand the different kinds of DNA, the different kind of DNA tests, and get the one that actually answers your question.
Yes.
I was going to quickly say about Spanish speaking countries.
Mhm.
It's worth remembering that their naming conventions are completely different than the English
Oh,
speaking world.
totally.
So you can have an ancestor that could have a double-barreled first name, like Louis Felipe or Juan Carlos. Um, that's their full first name. I haven't really seen Spanish-speaking people with a middle name like that, but they will also have a double last name,
Mhm.
starting with their paternal surname and then their maternal surname. So usually in official documents that you may see both, the maternal name may be dropped and just the paternal name. But again, that's just another thing to keep in mind. And of course, not only will you have to know Spanish when you go further back in time, well, you have to know Spanish, you'll also need to be able to read Spanish cursive and not just Spanish cursive,
That's right.
old, old
Old.
Spanish,
Mm-hmm.
Spanish cursive.
I do want to make a comment. Diane is in the chat. She posted, and this is coming to some of your question here, Donya. Start with the U.S. experience before moving to the Caribbean. Many valuable clues exist in the U.S. records, particularly on immigration and naturalization records. So, unlike the U.S. experience where slaveholders lived in the same area as the enslaved, more often than not, the Caribbean British slaveholders chose to stay in Great Britain. They turned their holdings over to overseers and managers. And I think that is really critical. So I'll turn
I,
it
and I actually learned that in my research of my
to you.
yeah, those were things. So I'm asking, like, I actually know some of these answers, but I'm asking it
Good.
because I know other, people really want to know. But that was one of the things that I definitely learned. Um, that the last thing you said, but especially the naturalization records and
Yes.
everything, and learning stuff from the U.S. first, because I had to go that route in order to figure out which way where my father actually came from. And in the
So you're
process,
starting from the present, going back.
exactly. And the thing that I did learn most about my father's line is that they were travelers. They were world travelers. They
Mhm.
went everywhere. They went to Canada. They went everywhere. I mean, they were in all parts of Canada. My grandmother actually died in Canada and then had her body taken back to Montego Bay to the
Mhm.
family cemetery. So it's just really, it was a lot. It was very, very interesting how, some of what we would consider some of the poorest people actually traveled everywhere.
Yeah.
They were
Yeah.
big travelers, huge. You
Which
had them in
again,
Australia. I had them, like, I had them in Australia, I had them in Canada, certain parts of Canada. I had a couple in Spain, some here in Florida, and maybe two in Mexico. And they were
Which
everywhere.
he says they could have left a mark in any of those places too.
As did he do. Yes.
And babies could have been born, marriages could have happened. So
And
again, follow that paperwork, follow what's in that local community, country, whatever it is that you're targeted on. So
which is what he did.
huh?
Yes. Which is what he did. I found a sister.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Also
Go
going to
ahead.
recommend don't don't try to go straight to the records. If researching my South Carolina, my mother's maternal line in South Carolina taught me anything, research the history of the place that you are going to attempt to research in first. Understand its history, who settled there first, who started selling land, when did people start arriving, what countries did those enslaving families specifically start arriving in that place from first. Also realize that in this part of the world, specifically the Spanish I'm thinking of now, that was very Catholic dominated.
Mm.
Their governmental structure and the religious structure was kind of one and the same. So again, you're going to have to research the history of church, the church records,
Marriages, everything.
all,
Yeah.
all of that kind of stuff. So don't try to go straight to the records first. Really spend, even if it's going to take you 6 months worth of reading books
For
about a
years.
specific place or years, I'm telling you, and Donnie, I know you're going to jump in here. You will thank us for that one simple piece of
Yeah.
advice.
And there's another piece of advice that I'm gonna give, because if I don't, Sheila is gonna haunt me for the rest of her life, and that is study your maps, because that was something that Shelley was talking about as well. Those maps mean everything. And if we didn't study our maps for South Carolina, there are places that we would have never even learned about. There, we would have never known that that parts of Georgia actually used to be part of South Carolina. And in doing that, learning those little nuances, not just that, learning the dates when those things happen. If we didn't learn those dates and learn that type of information, we would have never found certain people. You would have never known who they were, where they came from, how they disappeared, and then all of a sudden turned up again. You don't know that. So topography, studying the maps, is just a major, major thing. I used to just read so mad when Sheila would say to me, study your map, Donya. And I don't want to study my map, Sheila. I don't want to do that. You need to know the map, Donya. Okay. And now I get it.
Well, this was a discussion I just recently had, and some people might be listening that was in that discussion. And I'm going to pull it to the United States, and it follows up with what Brian just said. We were looking at the boundary lines. And one of the points that came across that I could be born, lived, and died in 3 or 4 different counties and never moved.
And never moved.
Never
Yes.
moved. And this was our discussion. And we were showing the resources and things. And, there's maps and websites, Map of Us, that will show you timelines when boundary lines change. Counties were breaking off from counties and this, that, and the other. So again, that time frame is so critical.
It is.
Dates and things like that. So
it is very critical.
What is another question that you had that you will share with us?
Yes. So another question was, what are the main challenges that a person might face when researching in the Caribbean? But I think we just answered that, didn't we?
I think we kind of answered that. Inaccurate. Records fragmented, and like Brian made a comment, don't just look for records. You also got to, I'm going to say this in the context for the Caribbean, just as much as if I was in what we call the United States. Who is around your people? Who is in that community? Knowing the history of that community is critical to find out, because as you go, if there was a census, you're going to follow who was around your people or in that county or area, and keep going. And even if we're looking in the Caribbean, if we're looking in, any parts of the West Indies, this, that, and the other, you want to know who's there, the time frame they're there, and so forth. Brian, look like you had something you wanted to add.
No, so another question, and I think this is actually a great question. How can I trace enslaved ancestors when there are few or no records available?
This is where you want to find plantation records. That's one of the big keys, because Mr. Slave Owner, and I think Brian made a comment earlier, they had to pay taxes. They created the laws, and I'm going to say white European descendants, or whoever you want to call it, slave owners, slave masters, whatever. They also created laws that said you had to do this, that, and other, and you need to report this, that, and other. And it's the same thing. So look at the business records that he mentioned earlier. So that could include inventories, sales records, correspondence are gold mines to find out who they're talking to. And they probably will mention like they're enslaved individuals. You also want to check for if there's any type of manumission type records that are out there. And that would be documents that are relating to people being freed, right? And some of these, of course, you want to see if you can find ship manifests. And we've got a future webinar coming up with Dr. Jenny Williams that'll be coming on, and we'll be discussing kinfolkology, which is a source of ship manifest and things in the domestic slave trade. So that's the movement. And New Orleans was the biggest slave trading place for our country per se at during different times. So again, slave ship manifest might be able to have some records and things. You also got to follow the wills and the probates and see if they're I hate using the word divvying up, but distributing their enslaved population as gifts or to their children. Or are they buying and selling, or are they selling to pay off debts? So you're looking for those kind of records. And of course, tap into somewhat online resources like the transatlantic slave trade databases like Slave Voyages, Oceans and Kinfolk. And again, we'll have Dr. Jenny Williams from the University of Virginia talking about kinfolkology. So stay tuned for that coming out. But you know what? Let's not leave out newspaper advertisements as well, and notices and things like that. Brian?
One. If you're researching British, the British colonies and enslavement, Lloyd's of London.
Oh,
For whatever reason, Lloyd's of London, for those who aren't familiar with it, is a major, it still is a major insurance company, British. They readily admit that they've made a fortune through enslavers in the Caribbean mortgaging their enslaved people. For some reason, British enslavers had a habit and a culture of living beyond their means, spending more money than they had, getting deeply into debt. And what did they do? Again, we're talking about business papers. They sold their enslaved peoples to settle those debts. Lloyd's of London has a database, and they're still going through the records, and they're still adding to it. I believe it is freely available that have those mortgage papers.
And that's the same for the U.S. as well. You're looking for, and I'm going to say, I don't need to call out all the big banks or whoever, but look at the history of these institutions. And if people didn't know, slaves, enslaved people could be insured, mortgaged, used as collateral, rented, and gifted.
Yes.
That is
That rented one is what got me a lot. That rented one, that was how we found certain. That was George Quarles. He was a rented enslaved person, and that's crazy.
Let's not forget Wall Street. And Wall Street, and the big banks, the ones that go back to the colonial period, they readily admit that that's how they made. That's why they're wealthy. That's why they made their money, was through slave mortgages and then slave insurances.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Business, money, economics. So you're
Right.
really following financial records in some aspects to follow where the money is being divvied out or being spent. And
Following the money is always important.
yeah,
That's just, no matter what, it's been like that throughout time. Follow the
yes,
money. Even when you watching your favorite crime show on TV, what is the first thing that they say to you, that you hear them saying? Follow the money. And
yes,
that's what it is, because that money will lead you to where it is that the next step you need to go, the next person you need to go
yes.
to, because that's how you find all that stuff out. It's that money.
And Diane put a comment in the chat. The Caribbean instituted a period of apprenticeships between 1834 and 1838 prior to full emancipation. So you want to look for those records as well.
Mm.
So your next question, Donya.
This is a good one. How can I verify the information that you find online? Because everybody right now, all research is online. So
Mhm.
how do you actually verify that stuff? How do you know that it's true?
And this is going to be general. This is going to be for all genealogical research. Number one is cross-reference the information with multiple sources to ensure their accuracy. Okay. You want to look for original documents, images of records, or rather than just transcriptions and things. Everybody's on AI right now. But again, line by line needs to be checked. If you're going to use that information, you need to be able to verify it, but also find supporting documentation. And I'm going to put this out. I call it the James Dent Walker rule here. And I say about this a lot of times is that if you put something out and you say something, and I'm going to say, I am a descendant of Moses Williams, and I'm using y'all's ancestor. And you know what? Then I'm going to come behind you and say, give me 3 pieces of supporting evidence that will show that you are a descendant of Moses Williams. And I believe that's at Edgefield, South Carolina. But you also want to, besides verifying that route, you want to consult with genealogical societies or some other experienced folks that might be also doing research in that same area.
Mm.
You want to look at the historical context to just make sure that the information you're looking at goes with the time, goes with the law. So I'm giving other things to also find as supporting. And was there any historical events that are around that could have been documented in this time? Right now, I'm doing research on the siege of it's the siege of Charles. I'm sorry, I'm gonna take that back. It's a Revolutionary War siege of Charleston area, and I'm trying to find out how many Black Revolutionary soldiers were there. I keep coming up with 0, but then I've got descendants bringing forth information. So that makes me go out even further because we got proof from documents, resources, oral history that says they were there. But when I
Mm.
go look at this, I'm not seeing it. And they'll say, oh, they don't know exactly how many were there or this, that, and other. No, 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 no. So we got to bring light, to bring supporting evidence. So I think those are some good routes to go. Brian, did you have anything to add?
Well, I do, thanks to a comment that Diane made.
Yeah,
The Caribbean is renowned for 2 things, neither of which is good for the preservation of records:
right.
earthquakes, and hurricanes. So even though they're not part of this discussion, I'm thinking of places like Montserrat and Haiti, which have had catastrophic record loss because of natural disasters.
Absolutely. Great point. And again, what happened in the community or where your folks were at? Donya, any other questions that you have? We're doing good on time.
There is one other question that I have, and that's, what should I do if I hit a brick wall in my research? Because brick walls are common. especially for African American research, it's definitely a common thing. But with Brian bringing up stuff like the lack of records available in the Caribbean islands and things of that nature, you're going to hit that brick wall a lot harder and a lot faster than certain people. So how do you combat that?
Well, generally for genealogical research, first thing I tell people is calm down. Because and I'm saying that because I deal with that in research all the time, which we all do. What do we do? Number one, take a step back. You know what? Brick walls enrich and enhance your research skills because you want to resolve them. So one of the things is take the information that you've collected and go back through it. So you want to think, did I get everything I'm supposed to have? Have I researched enough? Brick walls sometimes are created by us because we're unaware of a resource or maybe we're missing a step. A lot of times I like to make a list. This is what I'm trying to look for because I already know the brick wall is there with research in African Americans. So I want to make sure that I've hit my checklist. Did I check this? Did I check that? Just what we've talked about, all the different records. Check the sources that you have. I got to sometimes broaden my research and step back a bit and look at it from a different direction. Again, did I create that brick wall, or is there actually a really brick wall and maybe there isn't any other records there to be found? But be okay with that. But the skills of going after it should enhance you for the next one. And I'm saying, maybe, and I'm going to use this as an example, you're looking at, say, the plantation owner or the head of your family. Maybe you need to go look at his siblings and also research them or their children. So looking at it a different way to maybe resolve whatever that brick wall is that you're stumped at. So again, looking at genealogical societies, following the Center for Family History, there's a blog, we got resources up there. Look at what's available and try to combat from there. But I don't see brick walls as a negative. I see them more as the challenge that I need to work towards. Go ahead, Brian. Bring something a little more positive.
Oh, I wish I could. I wish I
That's
could.
not possible.
I know. But I'm
Or
trying to make it positive by saying it's going to enhance your skills. I would
okay,
get a
well, no,
genealogy
actually,
buddy.
so
That's what
actually,
I would do.
actually, I have two. So, or, and I'm not saying how common this is, you may be trying to hammer a square peg into a round hole.
Oh,
That could be because you've heard something from a family oral history that's just a little
mhm,
twisted, not quite correct. So you're trying to make the puzzle pieces fit that don't fit,
mhm.
and that can form a brick wall. Um, oh, and the second one has just gone out of my head, and Donnie and I were just talking about that. But I'm gonna stick with that one. Um,
That's a good one too, Brian. That
That is
that's
a good
mhm,
actually
one.
one of the best ones because that's one of the reasons why I think of genealogy research as more like geometry because I like math.
Yeah.
And it really reminds me of that. That's the proof and the hypothesis, and that's what all of that is. And if anybody who's a math person and who knows about geometry, they always know you have to prove that right angle to be a right angle. It is
Correct.
that's what you have to do, because even though if this looks like a right angle, but it may be off just a little bit, and
Mm,
you have to prove that it is actually a right angle. And then in your search, and you're finding it, and your hypothesis says, I believe this is a right angle because blah, 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 blah. Well, that's what the whole oral history is. So and so is your grandparent because so and so, blah, blah, this, that, and the third,
mhm.
until you find out that so and so and this, that, and the third didn't actually happen. So, it's that stuff.
Well,
and
again,
I don't want to sound like Spooky Mulder off of X Files, and I know I just dated myself there. Um, Sometimes the ancestors aren't ready for you to know the story.
That's
You have
exactly where I was going.
you have the name, you have the barest of minimum details, but they're not ready for us to know the story yet. And Donnie, I've got to talk to you about Miles Yeldell and the dream that I had about him last night.
I ain't messing with that
So
man.
You have to be ready to receive.
yes,
Yeah.
And I want to say, and a lot of times when we're dealing with brick walls, be it in the Caribbean, be it in the United States, be in UK, wherever it is, you have to be ready to receive. And when you're ready to receive, then you know how to handle it. And I know that's kind of vague, but again, think of brick walls as challenges that you're going to go through a process to break them down. Don't try to go grab the whole thing at once. Split that little bad puppy up into little minor steps and go at it with a little different mindset. And yes, Karen K posted about the 21st century. That is one of the biggest challenges us as researcher has is
Yes.
who we are today and what we know and what we experience and trying to go back and make it fit that hole in the peg that what he
Yes.
talked about. It's then you're stressing yourself out.
I think she
So,
hit the nail on the head with that one because
Karen,
so many people will go and do their research and think this, that, and the third about stuff when you're actually thinking in this time period. You
yes,
cannot think in this time
no,
period or in your particular, whatever your time period is. You have to go backwards. You have to think like they were thinking.
or
This
think of the
will allow,
situation in
or
the
think
era.
right.
Yes.
This will, first off, as an African American researcher, it's
Mhm.
going to allow you to be able to take that pain that's there already.
That's true.
You're going to be able to take it better. Speaking in my own, I'm speaking from experience on this one, guys, because I tricked my mind so much so when I first started doing my research that I knew I was going to find slavery. I knew I was going to find rapes. I knew I was going, I just knew I was going to find all these different things. And I prepared myself to find it. And so because I prepared myself to find it, because I just made myself know this was that timing and it has nothing to do with what's going on at this particular moment,
That's right.
I was ready for it.
Right.
And I might have been too ready, and it kind of made the ancestors a little bit upset. So, but nevertheless, it is what allowed me to like really learn about who my ancestors were, what it was that they went through, and who those white ancestors were and what they did and why they did it. It allowed me to understand the business aspect of slavery a lot better as opposed to taking it personal and just understanding that you enslaved my ancestor and that's all that I know. Whereas now I know that there was a business. I know that they did their things because they had to feed their children. They had to put their kids in school. Was it right? Not at all. Not at all. But because they still had to do all of these things, this was the way they had to do it. Was there a different way to do it? Of course it was. But that's life. Everybody has something that there's a different way to go about. But this is
And
what it
again,
was.
what we know now in our experiences,
Right.
totally different than what our ancestors would have had.
That's
So,
right.
Donya,
I'm
go
going to
ahead.
say that actually, I'm going to say that Diane Wormsley is reading my mind, and this is my proof. Diane, I actually wrote that down because I wanted to say this before we moved on to the
Go
next part of
ahead.
this conversation. It is worth remembering that only a tiny, tiny percentage of available records that can help us have been digitized. If you think about the entirety of the digital records that have been digitized as a single snowflake on the tippity top of Mount Everest, that's the percentage of records that are current that could be digitized that have been digitized. So sometime, well, more often than not, the mountain ain't coming to Muhammad. Muhammad has to go to the mountain. So again, you were
And we
researching the
pointed that out
Caribbean.
earlier to visit either the country or the state or wherever you're doing your research at. You have to, if you can, do it. Or you need to find, and I'm going to make this comment for myself, a genealogy buddy.
Yep.
in that area where you're at, be it the partnership with the historical society or you're somebody you know. So I have certain people, like if I'm doing North Carolina research, I'm calling Renata Yarborough Sanders. If I'm doing Oklahoma, I'm calling Angela Watt Raji, or we're talking about this and sharing information on our Freedman Friday nights. And again, find out who's doing it or who's there and start building a relationship. It will help you tremendously. And
Yes.
again, James Dent Walker, bring up three supporting evidence to whatever you're claiming, especially when you're dealing with the brick wall, because you know what? The answer might not be there. We got burned counties. Same thing would have happened. Brian, you comment about the hurricanes and things like that. Absolutely. Records
Hmm.
could have been destroyed. But there's always the opportunity with the supporting evidence that you can get a glimmer of what happened or who's where and when. So hopefully, I'm going to give this question to Donya, and I would like you to state for the audience, what is the biggest takeaway about what you heard today, what we've discussed today? What is your big takeaway that you would like others to know?
My biggest takeaway is it's always the information that is given. Make sure you're taking, I hope that whoever's watching this show, that you're always taking down notes, that you're always getting the information that you need, because not only do you have the experts who are on the show, the people who can help you and guide you on the show, but you have people who are in the chat that can give you can help as well. Like Diane was right there. She was able
Yes.
to give information. She was able to say different things. Utilize the stuff that you have available to you. Understand that even though this is live now, it's recorded, and you can go back and listen to it and be like, now wait a minute, what did she say about such and such and such? So I want you to be able to, what the biggest takeaway is, utilizing the resources that is given to you, so that you can find the things that you need to find, because that's what helps a genealogist, especially an African American genealogist, because we are always so cut down. Every time we think we got a spot, something changes, something moves, and they switch it, and we have to go around it. Are we able to go around it? Yes, because we're resourceful people. We've been resourceful all our lives, but you still have to do it. And that's the part that you hate and you get mad about and you got to deal with. Don't get mad, just do it.
That's what
I'm
I
saying
say.
that to myself too.
Yes.
Because I get mad. I'm mad now about something that Brian is going to catch it. So he going to know.
Well, and again, that's great advice. And again, hopefully today we've shared resources and you made comment that you'll be able to watch this again. So you can see the list of
That's
resources
right.
that's there. And again, the Center for Family History is available. We have these every third Saturday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Brian, do you have any parting words you want to share with the audience?
We scribbled it down. Do not apply U.S. norms in either record production, record keeping, the history of a country's development, record preservation practices, all of that, all of those good things. Don't apply our standards or our practices or the way that we do things onto other countries. Everyone's got their own arc and their own journey, and all of these small nations coming out of colonialism have other pressures and kind of other demand. They they don't have the scale of resources and finances and all those good things to be able to to be able to do it. I know Barbados is doing a wonderful job in terms of actually
They're opening up their
digitizing the
records.
wealth that
Yes, right
that
now.
they have and getting them up. Everyone's got their own pace and, as I said, their own speed. So patience, which maybe genealogists were not exactly renowned for having, um, patience and grace is always a good thing.
Well, I appreciate both of you being here And Brian is at the museum, so I hope that there's folks listening there and on
Hmm.
Facebook and in the chat. Appreciate your time spending with us. We hope we gave you at least a glimmer of the transatlantic slave, looking at Barbados. The museum is built on Gadsden's Wharf site. That is a sacred site. Take the opportunity if you can and visit that museum, and definitely say hi to Brian when you get there and stuff. So I just want to say thank you for the folks that are here. And we're going to give you back your Saturday. It's about 2:15 Eastern time, and we're going to let you have the rest of your day. Happy researching, and thank you again. Brian, you want to take us on out?
I will take care, everyone.